Welcome and thanks for listening to the Big Ideas for Better Places podcast today. If you like what you hear, we'd encourage you to please leave us a rating and a review on iTunes or wherever you're listening to this. This really helps other folks find out about the podcast, our great guests, and the wisdom that they have to share. So without further ado, on to today's episode.
Please listen carefully.
Welcome to the Big Ideas for Better Places podcast from CityWorks Expo. My name is Brad Stevens, and I'll be your host today. It's my absolute pleasure to introduce you to our guest, Miss Marcela Guerrero Casas, the co-founder and managing director of Open Streets Cape Town. How are you doing today?
I'm well. Thank you for having me.
Of course. I really appreciate you taking the time. I think it's a 7-hour time difference, so I think you're probably ready to go home soon. So I do appreciate you sticking around a little bit for us.
It's a pleasure.
Well, I wonder, you've been doing this for a few years now, and I wonder kind of if you can explain kind of what it is that you do and how you think that fits into this broader realm of creating better places.
Well, we have an NGO in Cape Town. It's called Open Streets. And 5 years ago, I got together with a group of people who had a common desire, and that was to do something positive for the city where we live. I was born and raised in Bogota, Colombia, and have been in South Africa for 12 years now. Cape Town has been home for about 5. And I was, just really interested in doing something that was very concrete, that would mobilize others, and this concept of open streets was something that fit that bill. So you might be familiar with the concept of open streets, but maybe for those who haven't heard about it, it's the creation of car-free routes across the city. So in a place like Bogota, which is where I was raised, this happens every Sunday, every public holiday, over 100 kilometers become car-free routes. And that was what prompted the idea in Cape Town to bring this group of people together. So we initially thought, let's just shut down a street in the city and see what happens. But we didn't really have a plan to create an organization, which is really what this has become. And I think this, to answer your question, is where we come in, because we are creating a platform for people who live in Cape Town to imagine a different city.
I'm kind of intrigued by this idea. You mentioned that you were looking for something concrete and positive that you guys could do. And I'm intrigued when you're talking to people, why is it so important that what you guys do is something very tangible as opposed to kind of like the more traditional dialogue sessions or so that we might have done in the past?
I think both of them are important. That's been our experience. But there's something very powerful that happens when people experience something. You and I know that. So we can be told how to ride a bicycle. We can read books about it. But it's a different story when we get on a bicycle and try to, sort of maintain equilibrium. And for me, it's the same story. So when I started having this conversation with people who hadn't heard about Open Streets, and I said, where I grew up, this happened, people would be like, okay, that sounds kind of interesting, but what's the point? And when we did it, a lot of those people came back to me and said, oh, I get it. Is this je ne sais quoi? You just experience magic when the cars are gone and everybody comes onto the street. Kids are playing safely. So we can write about the stuff. We can talk about it. We all know that's great. But there is something very special about experiencing that something and then building on it. So that's why I said that I think both are really important. And we do other activities. So we have, for instance, a group called Street Minds. And this is made up of a group of professionals who look at streets from a design perspective, engineering, transport management, you name it, but all very technical professions. And these people come together once a month and talk about projects. And this is all housed within our organization. So we definitely make space for the experiential stuff, but also the more, I suppose you could say, academic kind of dialogue.
Well, I'm intrigued kind of how you make that bridge that, you have this incredible event and people are excited. And how do you then take that excitement and turn it into tangible action for change in some ways?
Well, that's a question we're still trying to answer, to be honest, because the feedback we get on the day, and maybe also to put this into perspective, we started 5 years ago. We've only done 13 of this, Open Streets days, so it's not like it's become a habit yet. And that's the reason why we have not yet figured out how to turn people's excitement into action and commitment. Incidentally, this morning I was having a conversation with someone who's quite keen to take part, and I was explaining how we have made a lot of progress in convincing city officials that this is a good thing. Sort of neighborhood institutions, things like neighborhood watches, improvement districts, things like that. So institutions, that this is a good thing. But something we're still lacking is getting those participants at Open Streets to become activists, to feel that Open Streets needs to happen all the time and that they're going to take this matter into their own hands. So, we oftentimes hear from people, oh, it was amazing to be able to have my kid and let them run around at their own pace without having to worry. But I very rarely, and then they say, when are you doing it again? I very rarely hear, I want to be part of this and I want to make sure that this happens in my neighborhood all the time,
Well, there's so many things to dig into there. Early on, you mentioned creating a habit, which I think is such a fascinating way of really what we're trying to do in some ways when we create better communities. And what you're aiming to do, I imagine, is to take this really exciting day and make that normal, isn't it?
That's exactly what we're trying to do. I remember one of the very early on, I was trying to explain, what ciclovia or open streets looks like in Bogota, and somebody said, "Oh, it's a little bit like people go to church on Sundays because that's what they do." And without bringing religion in, I said that's exactly what it is. There's no event permit. There's no what time does it start and what is the program. It's just what you do on a particular day of the week. And obviously, it's been over 45 years in a place like Bogota, so we have a long way to go. Hopefully it's not going to take us that long in a city like Cape Town. I mean, hopefully we're learning from what works in other cities and what doesn't. But incidentally, this is one of our biggest challenges. So we wanted people to get excited about open streets. And the first open street was super well attended, lots of activities, so much so that every time we did it, it just grew, exponentially. And the very last one we had, so during those first 4 years, we did short closures, not more than 1.5 kilometers. And the last Open Streets Day we had was a 5-kilometer stretch. And most people still loved it. The feedback was great. But some of the feedback that came back that you could say wasn't so positive came from the perspective of, oh, but there wasn't as much entertainment and, the concentration of the activity wasn't as great as it used to be. So it's, I oftentimes say that this is a bit of a double-edged sword. We got people to get really excited about being on the street, but now they got a little too comfortable that they were there to be entertained rather than to occupy the space for their own reasons. And so, for us and for me at least, it's a transition stage. And I am confident that the more we do the long stretches and the more people start to experience mobility, and that there isn't, we don't need to have bands and people dancing for us to feel welcome and included in the space, that this will one day become a habit.
I'm intrigued again by this idea of you mentioned these people that are essentially coming as consumers of what you're doing, and that this idea of how to turn those consumers into activists. And do you think in some ways that they've just never thought that they can create change? Or I don't. The history of South Africa is obviously very different from many other places, but I wonder, is it about their ability to become an agent of change, or do they just not think it's important, or do they just not? Where is that gap coming?
I think it's a combination of factors. So for one, South Africa in general, but particularly a city like Cape Town, has great needs. The economic disparities are enormous. Our issues here are very serious. From service delivery at a very basic level, to having the highest homicide in the country and a very high homicide rate in the world. These things are serious. So something like Open Streets is often perceived as a nice to have rather than a must have. And obviously it's our job to demonstrate how, it's really important to create the spaces, because actually safety, or the sense of community and safety, can be built in those spaces. So that's one area. The other, which is a little bit more anecdotal, and even though I've lived here for 12 years, I'm not South African, so I think it's difficult for me to say this with authority. But I remember a South African saying to me, we South Africans just don't feel comfortable occupying public space. It's not natural. It's not sort of in our culture. And I take that with a grain of salt because I have seen, places where people really get onto the streets and there's that very vibrant street life and public life. And this happens in South Africa. But it is true that the kind of public squares, the plazas are not the type of places you find in Latin America, where they're just full of stuff, people selling things, kids playing, people just, sitting around. So I think that there's also something about, maybe just the lack of habit of occupying those places. So I would say it's a combination.
It's fascinating to know how our cultures change these and how the context matters so much in these things. That like you said, in Bogota it was just natural that this is what you do sometimes, and in other places it's not. And it's hard to pinpoint where that comes from, isn't it?
Yeah, and I also think it's about being exposed, to new ways of using the space. I mean, I know safety here is a big deterrent for lots of things, but public space or walking on streets and kind of using those spaces freely is huge. You can't tell people, oh, it's going to be okay, because oftentimes it isn't okay. And sometimes I joke and I say I've become very risk averse, which is kind of ironic given that the whole project is about getting people to try new things. But you do feel responsible and you do say to yourself, but it only takes once. It only takes one bad experience. And so I think oftentimes reality is it's very real. I know that's redundant, but it's not just perception. And at the same time, I am very confident of the power of doing this regularly enough that we can change that reality. So it's at what point there's got to be a push and a give and take, I guess. Trying to maintain or understanding and appreciating that people are scared, but also saying, well, if we find an opportunity to control some variables, things like, doing it during the day, bringing lots of activities and energy into the space, safety in numbers, all of that, let's try it. And that's what we've been able to do. But it has to happen regularly. And that's where we are at the moment. I feel like we're stuck because we haven't been able to kind of figure out how to do it more cheaply, without so much red tape, getting more people excited. And so I think that our project has reached that place where it's ready to go to scale. And we as promoters are trying to figure out what it will take in a city like Cape Town.
Interesting. And I imagine that goes back to some of those prioritization questions in terms of, people often think about, the safety and the service delivery, those things is where most of the energy should be. But, I think that you guys make a solid case for why investment in a project like yours is important, but I imagine that not everybody sees that, do they?
Oh, exactly. Starting with city officials, and it's very understandable. They have so much pressure in from so many different areas of the city that it's very difficult for them to justify spending money on something like this. The irony is that because of the regulations that local government has, is that these things are so expensive. In other words, it could be a lot easier and cheaper if the sort of regulatory framework that we work within was more relaxed, or at least if it was relaxed for the kind of things that we're trying to do. And that is part of the conversation we're having. When you speak to sort of corporates, we haven't managed to get a lot on board, but the ones that have, incidentally have said, oh, we just like what you're doing. It's almost like they just see it and they know that it's good. Obviously it's good for the brand, but it's also just to see it as a good thing to support because it brings, sort of good stuff to the city. And I know that's very fluffy. We do surveys, we do quantify some of the things that we are sort of set out to accomplish. But at this early stage, a lot of it is very anecdotal. A lot of it is, oh, I went with my kids and it was amazing. So yes, it's a difficult sell, but I think as you pointed out, it does unlock stuff that is actually very difficult to do in any other way. It's actually just bringing people together that you start to break some of these barriers and start to have conversations that can lead to problem solving. At least that's what we believe.
Well, I think it's interesting because I think that we see that a number of projects kind of like yours that where there's almost two different priority sets in some ways. That the outward facing, I think you surely it's important for you guys to talk about transportation and safe streets and things like that. But I imagine that in your guys' mind, there's also this conversation about if we can get people together, what can happen when those conversations happen. And that's not necessarily something you put out in the forefront, but I imagine it's something you guys think about behind the scenes, isn't it?
Yes, behind the scenes, but are very much sort of, we obviously don't do justice to kind of our own internal philosophy, but our slogan is that open streets in Cape Town, in our view, can help bridge the spatial and social divides of the city. So yes, it's transport because it's a very what's the word, sort of sprawled out city. So, transport matters and people have been kept, out of areas with opportunities for many, many decades. So from that perspective, getting transport right and getting different ways of moving around the city is crucial. But for us, the social barriers are equally important to break down. And we speak about that very often. I think maybe we shy away a little because it's more difficult to quantify. And again, because it's early days, a lot of it is just anecdotal. But for us as a group, and when I say us, I guess I speak about the board, the co-founders of the organization, it's really about that ultimate goal of breaking those barriers, contributing to the process, because obviously a lot of other things need to happen for those barriers to really come down. And some of it is out of our control, but we believe strongly in creating the platform. And what we're thinking now more intentionally is how do we bring the kind of activities that help us generate the kind of energy, the kind of connections, that can lead us to those very concrete outcomes, where people are connecting, are creating bonds. And again, over time, and hopefully with repetition, we can start to demonstrate that.
This, it sounds like you guys are, there's a lot of different moving pieces, and I wonder kind of how, when you're talking to your funders and your government and even within the organization, how you guys maintain kind of a shared vision, even when you have multiple priorities in terms of what you're trying to do in some ways.
Well, incidentally, at this point, maybe it's a blessing in disguise, but we have been working with the transport department in the city and local government. So the conversation has been very much about transport. And because that's the only funding that we've been able to secure from government, we've kind of gotten stuck on that conversation in a way. We recently had a conversation with city officials where we all agreed, not for the first time, but in a way, kind of the first time on, sort of minuted that open streets goes beyond transport, that actually the impact, includes things like social development and health and education and lots of other areas, social cohesion being a huge sort of challenge and priority for local government. And so now we're trying to figure out, well, what does that mean in practice? Which policies are we actually helping achieve, and how will departments come on board? Can we, in an ideal world, we see this being a sort of interdepartmental project. But how do we get there? We started with transport. It's very key, but how do we now create those linkages with others? So we're kind of in the middle of having that conversation, disentangling, sort of that understanding of where open streets have an impact.
Well, you've mentioned working with the government on this and that they have certain priorities. And I wonder what, in terms of creating these safe streets or in terms of just more broadly creating better communities, what kind of do you guys view as the role for the government in that case?
It's tricky in a city like this where there's, politics are very divisive in the city. And there is, in certain areas, particularly areas that are impoverished, there's a lot of mistrust towards the city. So, I think in theory, it's like any other local government providing sort of the basic, services, listening to people, consulting. And I think that there's some of that happens. But I think where we have managed to provide some value to local government is without the political baggage and all of that, to really enter some spaces where people feel that they want to take part. So even though, as I said at the beginning, we haven't managed to get people super excited and super active across the board, we have engaged with some groups and individuals who have really put a lot of effort into making open streets happen. And I think that's because we've, again, as an independent group, yet, very clearly working with the city, have been able to, sort of connect at a different level. So this is not about life or death, but it is about children, and it's about play, and it's about coexisting, and it's about things that might seem non-threatening, but obviously very essential, and people care about those things.
We'd like to take a moment now to say thank you to our sponsors today. The Urban Affairs and Planning program at Virginia Tech School of Public and International Affairs offers an interdisciplinary approach to understanding planning and policy for megaregions, cities, suburbs, and rural regions in the U.S. and abroad. UAP faculty have expertise in urban planning, architecture, urban design, economics, geography, political science, law, technology, and engineering, and provide students with a multifaceted understanding of how communities grow and change. Students apply their knowledge and professional skills by participating in real-world problem-solving with community clients through project-based studios and applied research. UAP emphasizes technical analysis and policy evaluation in approaching the complexities of modern communities. So a big thanks today to the Urban Affairs and Planning program down at Virginia Tech for being our sponsor. If you'd like to hear more, check them out online. But without further ado, we'll get back to today's guest. Thank you. Well, you mentioned trust in there, and I wonder how you guys have gone about building that trust in terms of your relationships with communities and with government. Like, what have you? Is there a cornerstone that you guys have made that you think has been crucial to building that trust?
We're stubborn. I honestly think that's a big part of the trick. We've just carried on. I mean, sometimes one of our board members says to us, I think you guys kind of overdo the public consultation thing, because we just have meetings after meetings after meetings, and our team is on the ground knocking on doors, bringing letters around, and I just don't think you can do enough of that. I think that helps with trust, but it also helps to show commitment, which I guess is the same thing, right? Once you show that you're in it for the long run, people start to believe that there's something beyond just the one open streets activity or day. And I think that's helped. And honestly, at the city level, in terms of the city government rather, we've just kept at it for 5 years. We really haven't given up. And I think we're reaching a point where it's not that we are giving up, it's just that we also realize, okay, the strategies also need to change. We've grown, we've covered some ground. How do we do this in a more efficient way? So we find ourselves going through sort of similar cycles every time we apply for a permit, for instance. And if I'm honest, does that mean that we've gained trust? I like to think to some extent, but not to the level where we can say this has gotten so much easier. We're working on the same team now. We're not there yet. So we still have a lot of work to do in that regard.
I'm wondering, kind of just to take us back to the very beginning here, like when you were thinking about what you could do, why was the focus on streets so important for this?
Yeah, I think I should speak for the co-founders, because we all had, sort of this interest. I mean, for me personally, okay, so let me start with the co-founders. I think everybody had, from a professional perspective, an interest, because they were either transport engineers or urban planners, or we're working sort of in the social work arena. I just think that was the kind of the overlap, street space. I happened to cycle, and I just thought that was a really great opportunity to get, more people on bicycles. And there wasn't enough of that here. I mean, lots of people cycle here as a sport, but seeing people using bicycles in a more, not just as a mode of transport, but just in a freer way, just felt like we didn't have enough bicycles. And that, to me, that was just a kind of a personal motivation. But as a group, I think that we just saw the synergies kind of happening in the street space, if you will.
Well, it is interesting because as I look at your guys' website, it's fascinating because you really see streets as a tool to fix pretty much all of societal's problems in some ways, and that if we could figure out how to effectively use streets and what streets are even supposed to be, that would have massive ripple impacts.
Yes, and that's why, earlier I mentioned that we have this group of professionals, many of them in a very technical sort of arena, coming together and talking about, okay, we have the theory there, and we also know what happens in practice, but how do we think about this differently? I think there's a great desire to bring a new perspective on streets, and a big part of it is because, yes, fatalities on the road are a huge problem in the city, but also I think we all know streets can be more than they are. This is how our manifesto goes. But I honestly think that we all, especially people who have either been outside of the country, outside of South Africa, have experienced other cities where people just have a much richer public life, much safer, much, sort of more inviting and inclusive, but also people who, go to townships outside of the city center and see how much vibrancy there is. And so how do we bring those sort of different pictures together, knowing that we can have that on our streets on a regular basis, the vibrancy, but also the safety. And so, yeah, I mean, I don't know if I'm answering your question very well, but those are some of the thoughts that come to mind.
But I think you're doing great, but it's I'm intrigued now. I think that obviously there's a very strong sense of history in South Africa, and I wonder, in terms of these public spaces, you mentioned that they're just not strong. So, are there places where people that wouldn't normally see each other run into each other? Are there gathering places where people come together?
Not a lot. There are. So in a city like Cape Town, which the city I'm most familiar with, there are some really great examples. There's a place called the Company's Garden. So it's like our Central Park, but much, 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 much smaller. But it is kind of the lung of the city, and it's very green and it's very beautiful. And you see lots of families and people of all backgrounds, especially during the weekends, having picnics and walking around. And, that to me is the epitome of a good public space. Then there's a promenade by the sea that also is very, very utilized, very well utilized, and also by all kinds of people. So you have those exceptions to the rule, but they're almost so grandiose that it makes you wonder why we don't have the smaller scale opportunities to do that, because especially because of the layout of the city where people live really far from the spaces that I've described, it's a whole trip, to go to these places. And so I think for us, or at least for me individually, the question is how do you use some of that energy and replicate it in other areas, sort of at the neighborhood level where people don't have to, they can still travel that far and still enjoy the sea and still enjoy these beautiful gardens. But surely there are other ways of bringing some of that home.
And it sounds like fear is one of the biggest factors keeping that from happening in some ways. Is that true?
Fear is a huge factor. And as I said earlier, part of it is perceived, but it comes from a real place of danger. In more than the city center, outside in the periphery, communities, live under constant fear. I'll never forget when we first went to a place called Mitchell's Plain, which is about 50 kilometers away from the city center. And at the first public meeting, we were sort of explaining what this whole thing was about. And a woman who said she was 40 years old and she had a 10-year-old kid who had never been able to ride his bicycle outside their little yard in the house. In fact, she said he's never been able to play on the street, ever. And I, as a 40-year-old, also haven't, I don't remember the last time I felt safe on the street. And the day we finally had open streets and lots of people came, and she came with her kid and the bicycle, and it was just such a poignant moment, that it was decades since, she felt that sense of safety. And so, and again, it's not like this place now is safe because we had open streets. Obviously now, next day, Monday, things went back to normal where people didn't, get onto the street and the crime and all of that was a reality again. But it's just having that opportunity to get a glimpse of the future. We oftentimes describe it like this: to suspend reality and to say, to see, and to feel that a different city is possible, that a different way of inhabiting the spaces is possible.
That's something that's near and dear to my heart, but I wonder if you could kind of articulate why it is that it's important for communities to be able to see a different future in some ways.
I think we're very jaded in Cape Town, and again, maybe all over the world these days. It just feels like everything is just so difficult, and we've gone back on so many areas where we thought we had made progress as humanity. And there's just something that's so intangible about that feeling of hope and that feeling of optimism. And allow me to divert here for a minute, but over the weekend, with things happening in Zimbabwe, and everybody thought, okay, Mugabe is out, on Saturday specifically. There was a big concert in Cape Town where a big sort of part of the diaspora was present because there was a big Zimbabwean artist, Oliver Mtukudzi. And I just could touch that sense of hope, in that place because of the music, because of the way people were connecting with each other. Obviously, the news, everybody was hopeful, and we know today that things haven't worked out the way we were expecting. But just that moment, to me, as a human being, had so much value. It reminded me why I do the work I do, and why it matters to provide people with that small but very powerful opportunity.
But I'm going to guess that in some ways you're hoping that if you provide enough people with that opportunity to envision a different future, that there will be enough of those activists that come out that you can actually start creating momentum towards that. Is that true?
In an ideal world, yes. I think that the logic would follow, that, we would arrive at a better world very quickly. But for me, it's maybe a less direct process. I think planting the seed has something that maybe we can't quantify, has a value that we can't quantify in the short term. But I am convinced, especially with younger people, with kids, that I just carries on and then one day that will manifest in some positive way. I just have no doubt. I don't have children, but I have friends who do. And when I hear them talk about open streets, the children, that is, I'm just reminded how important it is to provide those opportunities to those kids, and not because they're necessarily deprived. Some of them are, but not everybody. But when you as a kid have this memory of this amazing thing that happened, I think it does something. Like I said, I might not be around to see it, and be able to trace it back to an Open Streets Day. But I have my own memories, of Ciclovia in Colombia, and some of those have really lasted. I guess an example of that is that I'm now obsessed with the concept and I'm trying to help implement it in a different country.
That's such a compelling vision in some ways, that you're creating almost this foundation for change that you may never see in some ways.
Yeah, and I think that's been a huge lesson at a personal level. When I first started, I wanted to see something concrete, and I have seen a lot of things that are concrete, and I have heard people explain things that I can relate to very directly. It's not, it's all very tangible, but at the same time, I know that the impact is going to take some time to show. And sort of now pacing ourselves, I think is maybe the name of the game. How do we do this in a strategic way where we are doing it, or putting enough effort, but without forgetting the bigger picture? There are the other things, factors that come into play, and sometimes patience does pay off. And I think this is very telling in terms of our relationship with local government. We started, and as I said, we are a very stubborn group, which very often is a good thing, but sometimes it isn't, because people are people and we're sensitive, and as you know, relationships are fragile. And at the beginning, we didn't have the best relationships, in part because we were impatient. And I think we've learned the hard way that patience is just as important as showing people in Cape Town that shutting down a major road is possible. Those two things need to go hand in hand.
Well, it sounds like you're also you're not even sure that these, while you're creating this platform for change that you hope will come at some point, which you have no idea of, that it also may be that the platform that you're creating is very different from the eventual platform that does create that change. Is that true?
I'm not sure I follow the question. Sorry, could you repeat?
Absolutely. So, like, I guess in some ways, that there are you guys are operating under this guise that getting these people together, and we're going to talk about streets and safety on the streets and changing how we envision how streets are used. That's important right now, but that the thing that actually may be the thing that creates actual change or creates that much better community in the future may be something that's focused in an entirely different direction that may have come from those conversations that happen at open streets, but are very are almost hard to see that connection in some ways.
In a different manifestation. I mean, I think for me, success will be when people stop calling open streets an event, because it's just. For one, it's just what happens. So if the program does work out in the same way that it happens in Latin America, there will be a day when it happens on a regular basis. Okay, that's one part. But I think the manifestation I'm thinking of is more of on a day-to-day basis, being able to, walk out of the office and sit at a park and have lunch and know that that's just part of the city where we live. That that's part of the culture, that's just part of how we engage with our space. And that's very different from having a big road closure, obviously. But to me, is this culture of open space, of public space. And, it might take the form of lots of events as well, of just activating the space or enabling people to activate the space so much more frequently because maybe the red tape isn't there, regulations have changed. There is that sense of this is important. We need to invite people to make use of this city assets. So to me, that's what it will hopefully translate into. So I think you're right. The platform we're creating now is, in our opinion, what works. But it will definitely need to transform into what needs to be. That's anyway the hope of what our manifesto says. It says streets should be more than they are. They should be providing all these opportunities to create economic development, to create safety, more cohesive community, all these wonderful things. And it doesn't sort of define it in terms of what it looks like. The shape will change. A healthy movement does that. And it's informed by the new needs and the new reality on the ground. And we can't obviously foresee what all of those things will be in 5, 10, 20 years' time.
Well, I'm intrigued as you've been to different communities, and I know that you've lived in Bogota and in Cape Town, but you've also spent some time in the U.S., if I'm not mistaken. I wonder.
That's correct.
As you look at different places and as you visit different places, when you go to someplace new, or when you're walking through a community, are there things that kind of tip you off or indicators that something is going well here or that something needs to change in a place?
That's a really good question. I don't think I look out for specific things. I mean, a lot of it is just kind of that feel. And I know this is going to sound trite, but of just seeing lots of people on the street, sort of not confined by buildings or by roles and rules, but rather just kind of a free flow. And I think this is why people who are passionate about these issues, enjoy going to places where there's a little bit of chaos, because I think that's where you feel that you're alive with others, and then it's not always perfect, and in fact there are clashes, and but it just seems like it finds a way of finding a rhythm, that keeps people still at it and still functioning. And I mean, the city that was coming to mind at the moment was a place like Amsterdam, which, developed world and, very advanced and all of that. But I mean, it's pretty chaotic if you think about it. But it's a chaos that works. And yeah, that's maybe one way of thinking about it. Although I'm going to have to give this a think. What are the indicators when I travel to places that tell me that this is a city that, has what I enjoy, what I am looking for.
Well, it sounds like there's a sense of vibrancy is a big part of that. Just that people are interested and have energy in their place in some ways.
Yeah, and a desire to be in an active mode,
Mm.
and to be challenged. And I think that there isn't anything wrong with having to look over your shoulder sometimes. And I think this is all just part of being humans and being all sharing the space. But definitely that vibrancy is key.
Well, I'm intrigued as well to hear kind of as you've done this work. If, as you mentioned, you're in your fifth year here, is there something that you've learned along the way that was unexpected, or something that's really sticks with you all the time as you do your work now?
Well, one very personal finding, I guess, a realization is that there's only so much meaning you can find in these activities. In other words, when I started this, and I continue to be very passionate about the work. But yeah, again, it's a no-brainer. We're not islands, right? And so, oftentimes in my team also tends to go kind of inward looking, and, we're trying to figure out how do we do the closure, in a more efficient, less costly way. And then we just kind of get stuck on those things, and we forget that there's this bigger picture where, and you might have heard that in Cape Town, there's a huge drought. It's a huge, huge problem. And, in May, we might run out of water. It's like a real crisis. And so to just remember that we are part of a bigger picture, and that sometimes, the path, just changes, and you need to sort of go with the flow. And I guess that's what I meant by, if you put too much weight on meaning, from arriving at a particular destination, you're going to be disappointed. So to be very specific, when I started out, I had this, sort of this idea that within the first year we were going to do what we did on the 1st of October. So my first plan was a 5-kilometer closure. It took 5 years, and along the way, I've often felt like this was losing meaning for me because it wasn't happening in, all these years. And so again, at a very personal level, because I think I work with a team that just kept us and kept me focused in the big picture, and the, why we're doing this in the long term. It's not about, ticking the box that I decided to create 5 years ago because I thought it was going to be possible within a year. So I think I've learned scale, I've learned patience. I've learned that we need to be cognizant of the bigger ecosystem. And I still think the city, so I'm not thinking like global politics, just the city has all these dimensions, those dynamics that are really important. And I've also learned that working with a team that shares a vision is the most gratifying thing in the world. I've been very lucky to find really soulmates in this process, and it's really incredible. That's the kind of thing that you can't really, sort of ask in an interview at a new job. Am I going to find my soulmate in this workplace? And I've had that fortune, so that's priceless.
Well, I think it's really compelling to hear you talk about how, you have to understand that your project is important and absolutely vital to what you think the community needs to become, but also recognize that there are probably countless other projects that need to happen as well to get where you need to go in some ways.
Exactly.
Well, I wonder if you could kind of wrap us up with a question, or a story that encapsulates how you think communities should work, or what happens when a community does work well.
Well, there was it's kind of a funny story. I find it funny that when we first went to Langa, which is the oldest township in the province, the Western Cape province, we presented, our plans to city officials, and we were told, no, it's too dangerous. You can't shut down this road. It's a major road, and there's crime, and blah, blah, blah. It's the typical feedback we get. But luckily, we're stubborn, so we continue to persist. But the story that I'm reminded of is that during that process, we're having meetings with people from the area, and we explained to them. We said, city officials are telling us it's too dangerous. How do we come back to them with an idea? So that it's not we're just going to bring the military, because that's not what this is about. So what do you guys think? And somebody said, well, why don't we create a little campaign? And so if we see that something ugly is going to happen, or somebody's kind of starting to have a funny kind of look, whatever, we sing them the "Don't Kill the Vibe" song. And it just became this, and it didn't develop into anything. So we didn't have a "Don't Kill the Vibe" song, but it just became this conversation where that was going to be our campaign. I mean, and it came from somebody, who lived there, and he was like, no, of course it's not going to happen, because it's in our interest that the vibe doesn't die, that this thing is a positive experience for locals, for visitors. So it's our role to make sure that that we keep the vibe. And I just thought that's exactly what this is about. If it can inspire those kind of ideas, or at least that kind of spirit, because like I said, it actually didn't get implemented. And the thing is, the story goes that we've done this 3 times in that particular township, and we haven't had a single incident, which doesn't mean that, we will never have an incident if we continue to do it there. But I think that particular story reminded me how great the opportunity is, for this kind of ideas to come to the fore.
But also how powerful it is when people step to your aid in some ways as well, I imagine.
Yeah, exactly. And if we could multiply those experiences, I mean, I think that's kind of the tipping point to getting people to own this thing, to feel that this is my open streets, I mean, I think that the other, and this happens very often when I hear talk about, well, we are open streets and we're a 3-person team. So we're a tiny team, but when others, in bigger meetings kind of include themselves as we are doing this, I mean, that also just, if I could just hear that over and over and see that happen, I think that would start to get us to where we want to be, which is sort of much broader scale type of movement.
Well, what a great story to end on. And I wonder, Marcela, if our listeners are more interested in hearing more about what you guys are up to, where they can find more information out about that.
We are online. We have a website. It's openstreets.org.za. We are also on Twitter. The handle is @OpenStreetsCT. Facebook, Open Streets Cape Town. Instagram, Open Streets Cape Town. And our email address is info@openstreets.co.za.
Wonderful. And for those of you all that are interested in learning more about CityWorks Expo, you can find us at cityworksexpo.com. But thank you so much for taking the time today, Marcela.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for listening to the Big Ideas for Better Places podcast today. If you like what you hear, please subscribe and leave a rating. It really helps other people find out about our fascinating guests and find the information that we have to share. Lastly, please save the date for our upcoming event, October 5th through 7th in Roanoke, Virginia. And keep up to date by following us on Facebook and checking out our website, cityworksexpo.com. That's cityworksexpo.com. Thank you guys again, and look forward to seeing you next week. Thank you.